welcome to Books and Beyond. I'm Jimmy Bennett, I'm your host. Books and Beyond is a show where I like to highlight regular people, folks like you and me that have jobs and careers, but do extra things in the arts, writing, artistry, photography, ceramics, whatever. But a lot of people have a lot of hidden talents out there, and I'd like to show them to everybody. Also, I'd like to do points of local interest. We live in a beautiful area here in southeastern Connecticut with many, many interesting historical and beautiful places. But, living here, we tend to drive by them every day and not really pay attention to them. So I want to point them out to people to see what you have around you. I myself am a professional chef, have been for 43 years. But a few years ago, I took up writing, and I have published 2 books now, A Case of the Flying Corpse and Accounts of William Gillette, both books about murder in East Haddam, Connecticut at Gillette's Castle, featuring William Gillette, the famed actor who built the castle as the main character. And I'm kind of psyched today because I have, just this morning, I got my 100-year anniversary edition of The Case of the Flying Corpse. I've only printed a few, and I just wanted to do it because 100 years ago today, William Gillette moved into Gillette's Castle. I'm also a member of CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association, the Southeastern Connecticut chapter. This year I have the honor of being the co-chairman, but we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the show. But through CAPA, I got a lot of encouragement, I got a lot of good advice, and I met a lot of great people. And one of those great people is my guest today, Fred Neff. Fred, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Fred, tell us a little about yourself.
I've been a writer since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Then I was a journalist out in San Diego. I wrote for a magazine, San Diego Home Garden magazine. And when I drifted back to the East Coast, I wound up here in Connecticut working at the Millstone Power Plant, which I retired from last September after 36 years.
Nice.
Yes. Also have a business, power washing, Neff power washing. So that keeps me pretty busy, but I find time to write, and it's an outlet that I think a lot of people want to do, but they don't know really how to go about it, which led me to write a script for a teaching program I did for New London Adult Ed called How to Write a Children's Book.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I did that fall and spring for a few years. Many of my students, I taught probably maybe 10 to 15 to 20 each course, and you would think, wow, a lot of those are going to get published. It's like anything else, though. Very few actually got published. Some did, and some have been published numerous times now.
Right.
And one of them actually became a publisher herself, Robin Nelson, and she published my new book, Clues to Success, Making Rhyme Out of Reason.
Nice.
Very good publisher, very happy with her work on this book with me.
Good.
So
good. Well, that's a good point. Part of what we do at CAPA and amongst ourselves, networking as writers, there's always that big fallacy. People think, you're going to write a book and send it off to Macmillan and Publisher, and if they accept it, you're on your way, blah blah blah, which is just never happens anymore. They don't. They rarely do that.
Yes.
Unless you're a big name and you're already established, and that's basically what I've learned is they want you to become established before they even start looking at you.
Which comes first, the chicken or
right,
the egg?
Or the egg, yeah.
I actually got started writing children's stories.
Right.
People, I've done TV interviews before, live with Channel 8, and they always ask, why did you get started writing children's books? I wasn't young. So it was divorce. People go, divorce? Yeah, I wanted to make sure I captured all these stories that Calvin, my son, and I did. So I started writing these stories, and after I had about a dozen stories, I looked for a publisher and found it was not too difficult to get published.
Good.
But I worked hard on the stories to make them interesting because I hated reading some children's books over and over to my son that were boring.
Yeah.
So I made them exciting. I put some characters. Actually, Calvin is in some of the books. Calvin and Dad Books is the name of the business, but he's in most of the books. And the later series, he's in the Pirate Calvin series, so he gets to be a pirate.
Oh, wow.
Which is fun.
Nice.
So.
Yeah. Hey, that's great. Now, a lot of people are very interested in writing children's books. You know what I mean? I got to tell you something. The more I've learned about it, I think it's easier for me to write a novel than it is for people to write a children's book, because you have, like you say, you need an interesting story in a short thing, preferably.
That's the difficult part.
Right.
You have to have all of the parts of the story in a very short period of time in the book. You have to introduce your characters. You have to have a plot. You have to have some sort of something going on, so it's not just easy going throughout the whole book. Then you have to have a climax there, something happens there, and then the prologue, the end, and it should have a moral to it.
Yes.
Children's book should have a moral.
And a moral or an adage or a proverb or what, you're right. Now, one of the other things about writing children's books, I think that probably stymies a lot of people is the illustrations.
That's something I tell people in my course. Don't have a relative write do your illustrations, because you have no recourse. You have no Bunsen burner to light underneath them to get them to work. And so I asked them, look to get it outsourced. Yeah, it's going to cost you something, but you'll get it done with a professional illustrator, which I do because I'm not an artist. I do the original storyboard so the artist knows what I'm looking for, and I spend maybe 30 to 60 seconds on that, and that's it. I want the artist to put his or her talents to work. Right.
And that's important, because capturing that moment to go with your words is very important, I think that's great. So you wrote, I don't know, how many you wrote, 12?
11 children's books, and then my latest book, Clues to Success, Making Rhyme Out of Reason, which is not a children's book. It's a personal development book. Which captures a lot of philosophy that I've learned over the years. I've been to seminars. Of course, I was a salesman for a while, so I learned a lot about door-to-door sales. That's tough down south, but that gave me a lot to write about.
As a matter of fact, you
did. one of my themes in this book goes along with that the mind pictures what it wants, and like your mind doesn't necessarily think in terms of words, it thinks in terms of pictures. And I will give you one of my rhymes here, because there's a lot of rhymes. I have 109 clues all set to rhyme in this book, but there are stories and anecdotes in between, so it's not just a book of poetry. But picture perfect thoughts. It goes like this: the eye is but a pane of glass, a window for the mind, to sense the light its only job, not furthermore designed. The image forms inside our head, even if we're blind. Picture perfect, never challenged by our subconscious mind. If we dare to close our eyes and dream our future through, the brain will do what it must. Picture perfect thoughts come true. And that's really.
That's not a bad piece of poetry either, Fred. All right,
thank you.
I'll tell you that much.
Thank you. And everything in this book is original.
Yep.
So I don't copy anyone else's work.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And you have 109 clues in this book?
Right. 109 clues. Some are partial with the rhymes. Yeah.
And what gave you the idea to make the switch like that?
This is something I've always been interested in, personal development. It is, and it's become an integral part of my life, just a part of me, and like the call of the wild. When I finished writing children's books, there was still something I wanted to do, and this is the culmination of a lot of history of me. It's not all personal development. I've got some in here. I've got some inspirational stories about. Got one about divorce. You think, oh, how can that be inspirational? But it is.
Right.
But I've got stories in here too. Some which people look at me and go, really? I have to tell you one of them. But let me tell you the poem that this is sprouted from. It's called The Reason Why, and it goes like this. In the day-to-day tumbleweed travels of man, a few become leaders, they say I can. They don't luck out, they don't count on fate. But they do set goals with a deadline date. Oh, sure, they have doubts of a human mind, but they know a secret that you can find. It's not IQ or magic or some strange quirk, but a strong desire that makes the mind work. It'll build your dream to your mind's eye when you discover the reason why. And when you know the reason why, the how-to doesn't matter. It'll manifest itself.
All right.
I have a fairly quick story. I ran a marathon, the East Line Marathon, 1983, I think it was. Everything was going great. First, a marathon is 26.2 miles. So 13 miles, no problem. 17, got up to about 20, and I hit the wall. That's when you run out of energy. There's just nothing left. You're running on fumes. And I came up to one of these tables. There's water tables, for you to drink water at, whatever. But this had oranges on it. Oh, a source of energy. But it was empty. Obviously, I wasn't in the beginning of the pack. I was one of the last runners. So there were no more oranges, so I thought. But I looked on the ground, and there were these sucked out oranges that the runners had sucked the juice out of and tossed on the ground. I had to finish. I had to finish. My reason why, had to finish. No doubt. So I bent down, scooped up half a dozen of those, and I ate those for some energy, and it gave me enough energy to finish the race.
Got through it.
26.2 miles, yep. So.
Wow. Wow.
That's what I told you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. That story's in the book also.
Oh, is it good?
Yes. Yes. You can cringe when you read it.
And so your idea, this is you're hoping this book will help people find their way to success or find their way to what they're looking for.
I think you can look at this book and you can look at all the tragedy that I've written about and some of the mistakes I've made, and you can say, well, if this guy can write a book, so can I. Not only write a book, but you can use some of the basic principles that I've talked about.
Right.
And apply them to your life, to your business, to school, to many endeavors.
Yep.
So.
Well, I like I like that picture in your mind's eye. What you want, your goal or whatever. Because I think you're right about that. Sometimes I think that people ignore that voice in their head, or they ignore that. You know what I mean? They don't grasp it and really think about it. Hey, that's really what I want.
There is the flip side to that, though, and your mind talks so much, and when you listen to the whisper in your mind, it's great, but you have to be careful about feeding it negative statements.
Right.
Oh, I can't do this. Oh, I can't do that. I can't, because your mind just reacts and acts to that. It doesn't pass judgment whether it's right or wrong. It just does it.
Right.
So you have to be careful about those thoughts, and I write about that in here too.
I used to tell my kids one thing. A subconscious sort of a thought. I used to tell them, and it's a lesson that took me a lot of hard times to learn. But I said that usually when something happens or something's coming up, there's a little voice in your head. And that little voice in your head will say, this is not a good idea. This is not smart. This is not what I should do. I said, you need to listen to that voice. Because so many times when I ignored that voice, when I got in a car with the guys that had been drinking or smoking weed, or I was fooling around doing some mischief, when I was a kid, And I should have listened to myself.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always tried to teach them, listen to yourself, listen to your mind. And I think that's also important when it comes to, for people that are writing and want to write, you know what I mean? You need to, I have, it's kind of funny because, and I'm sure you've found the same thing. When people find out that I write a book, the first thing they always say to myself, oh, it's a cookbook? I say, no, it's not a cookbook, it's a mystery,
Or the second question they ask you is, can you help me write a book?
Yeah.
Can you help me write a children's book? I've got all these thoughts
Right.
that I've got, but I just never put them down.
Right.
And the first thing I tell them is, put them down.
Right.
Write them down.
Right.
Because once they're there, you can do something with them. But
Yep.
pulling it out of your head is
Yeah,
tough.
it is
for someone
and,
else.
And the other thing is, what I tell people is, it's just a story that, a story that I've never forgot. I was like, I was 17 or 18 years old, and I always wanted to be a writer. That was one of my things. When I was 16, 17, 18, I wanted to be a novel. I wanted to be I wanted to be the next Stephen King. I was gonna, you know what I mean? This is what I wanted to do with my life. But like life takes over. You get married, you have children, you got bills
Sure.
to pay, you got a mortgage, you got your house, you got things to do. So
But there is something I've learned, and that people ask me all the time, how do you find time to write the books? You always find time to do what you really, really want to do.
Right.
Whether it's playing hooky from work
Yep.
and doing something, or staying up late. I wrote the majority of this book, Clues to Success, between probably 9 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But I did it consistently.
Yep.
And I would sit there, whether I knew what I was going to write or not. I just,
That's how I started.
and
I
you,
did the same thing. When I got off of work after the kids went to bed, the wife went to bed, I'd go down and I'd just
Sure.
write a page, 2 pages.
Yep.
Sometimes it was 2 words, sometimes it was 10 pages.
Yep.
But like you said, and this story I was going to mention was when I was young, I was talking to this guy about, I wanted to be a writer and stuff. I said, but I wasn't really sure how to go about it, how to get started, And he told me a story about his roommate in college who every day sat down and wrote, same thing, whether he wrote 2 sentences or 20 pages, but he sat down and wrote.
Sure.
And so he said to him, he goes, do you think you're going to get published? He goes, oh, I know I'll get published. And it was an obscure book about a war between the Phoenicians and some other ancient civilization, which nobody had written about. And he goes, I just have to put it down. And I know that somebody, schools or somebody, are going to take it, And I thought about that a lot. And when I decided, and mine came about from a pulmonary embolism. I was very close, when that doctor told me, he said, you had about 15 minutes to live, Jim. And I said,
wow.
Wow, I better really start writing that book. I've written my whole life, stories and this and that, but I got trunks at home full of papers and, of ideas and stories and starts and halves, but that's when I decided, you got to do it. And now I treat it like that, almost like a daily chore,
You do, and you find the time to do that. It's just what writers do. Sometimes some people get up early in the morning, some people stay up late at night. When I wrote my children's books, I would go, this is a plug for Friendlies, I guess, but I wrote all of my children's books at the Friendlies in Mystic.
You're kidding me.
No, and I would go there in the morning on a weekend, and I'd go there. By the time I sat down, my mind had already started working because it knew breakfast and a pot of coffee, we're going to write. And I would go there. Heaven help me if I went there just to have breakfast.
Yep.
Because the mind didn't know the difference. It would say, hey, we're going to write. So I always had my writing stuff with me. And I would write. And that's where I wrote my stories.
Wow.
And sometimes I'd sit there 2-3 hours and write. It was the perfect place for me
Yep.
to write.
Well, that's great. If to be honest with you, I'm sort of the same way. I do it in my office. I get a little cubby hole of an office at my house, and that's where I do my writing. And I have tried to do it other places. I thought, well, I'll take my laptop, and it just doesn't.
Well, your mind will
Yeah.
pick that spot.
You're right.
And as long as it knows that you're there to write, it'll be ready for you to write. I do all my editing at home too, on the computer.
Yeah.
But my original writing, I get away from the house, and I tell my students for children's books, try to get away from the house because there's no phone, there's no TV,
Right.
there's no, oh, I'm going to do the wash today too.
Yeah.
So as soon as you get into a good groove of writing, bzzz, there goes the
Right.
dryer, bzzz,
Yep.
and there goes your train of thought.
Yep.
So
Yep. It is funny. It's funny how when I walk in my office and I sit down at my computer, my mind just picks up where I left off the day before, and
that's the way it
it's
does.
good. And I encourage people, even if you don't want to be a professional writer, if you don't want to publish a book, if you don't want to, there's so much, which I think is like wonderful what you did with Calvin and Dad books. You're putting down moments that your children will have, and their children will have, and their children will have. And not only, I always encourage people, write down your family stories. Keep a little journal of what you did, where you go, because it'd be interesting. I'm always fascinated when I used to find out my grandfather would talk about what it was like when he was a kid growing up, buying his first Model T for $25, and all the other little stories like that. And that's the kind of thing that you want to pass on to the next generation and the generation afterwards. Otherwise, everybody's just adrift. It's.
I tell students that you don't have to write to sell. You can write it for posterity if you want.
Right.
You don't have to publish a whole bunch of books. Just get one you want done and get it published and print 25 copies.
Well, like I said, I was always excited. I mean, I do want people to read my book. I'd love to get it out there as much as I can and stuff. But I really did my main goal. I always said to myself, now, in our family home in Long Island, I put my books up on the shelf with the rest of the books, the family Bible and the rest of it. And, generations down the road, hopefully, those books will be there. And it might be, it'll be Grandpa or Great Uncle Jimmy or Great Great Uncle Jimmy wrote this book, and I hope they enjoy it. You know what I mean?
However, one thing that writers who want to get published forget is marketing your book afterwards is a part of the writer's job. It's not the publisher.
Yeah.
You're not going to write it and that's it. Somebody else is going to.
Yeah, they're not going to book you on the Oprah show. And
that's why I do some festivals like the Garlic Festival coming up.
Yep.
A couple weekends, I'll have a booth, Calvin and Dad Books. I'll have all my books. Other authors will be there.
Right.
One of my favorites, Sheila Murphy Adams, is going to be there.
Yep.
She's a wonderful writer.
Yep. I will be at the Garlic Fest too. I'm looking forward to that. It's always a great weekend.
It's coming up, what, the 19th, 20th, 21st?
21st, 22nd?
Somewhere in there. It's always that weekend at the Old Mystic Village.
Right, the Old Mystic Village, yep.
Right, in Mystic.
Yep.
Obviously, yes. You don't want to let them know that.
Yeah, so that's and where else can you get your books?
If you go to Amazon, my new book is on Amazon. Calvin and Dad Books for my children's books. I don't have my new book on Calvin and Dad Books website as yet. I was going to do something separate with that. Not quite sure what I'm going to do. That's why it's not there. But you can go to Amazon and get my books. I've done some talks where at halftime, when I'm in the middle of my talk, somebody says, "Oh, I just bought your book at Amazon." So I know it's there.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
There are other authors, Fred Neff, but I'm the only one who has written Clues to Success, Making Rhyme Out of Reason, and the only children's book author named Fred Neff.
Oh, okay.
The only Fred Neff children's book author. Maybe get that right. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Now, are you planning on doing any more children's books?
I have one more that I've written. It's the conclusion to the Pirate Calvin series. I haven't gotten it illustrated yet. I'm still mulling that over in my mind. This winter, I may go ahead and finish that up.
Hey, get in on the Pirate Day down in Mystic coming up. Well, we're almost toward the end, but I want to just talk real quick because Fred is a big integral part of Kappa 2. We meet the third Monday of every month at the Groton Regency at 6:30. Anybody is welcome to come. We encourage, please, any kind of publishers, agents, illustrators, anybody who, even if you're not a writer, but you're part of the industry, please.
Wannabe, if you
Or
want to write a
yes.
book.
I remember I said that for
Sure.
a year. I stood up for a year and
I
I said, my name
remember.
is Jim Bennett, I'm a wannabe.
I'm a
And,
wannabe, I
me?
remember
And-
that, Jim.
Until I could finally say, yes,
True.
I wrote the book. Here it is.
True.
It's a lot of encouragement. It's a lot of networking, and I learned so much. I had so many misconceptions about the business and stuff. And like you say, one thing which is one of the hardest parts, which really is marketing.
Oh.
You think, how do you get your book out there? How do you
It
get
is.
people to see your book and, get interested in your book? And that is one tough.
Fairs is a way to go about doing it, though.
Yes.
Because you get used to showing your book.
Right.
And the more you show your book, the more familiar you become, and the better you are at promoting your book.
Right.
It's funny, I tell people when I show my book, I know my book's upside down because that's how I show them. I don't know them right side up.
Yeah.
That's a funny thing. When you know your book upside down, you'll know that you've shown it enough.
Right. Yep. Because that's some people are better than others at hawking. I'm more of a sit back kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like my book. But I've seen other people out there. Hey, come here. Yeah. But anyways,
one of my signature, sign-offs or whatever, is that I never ask somebody to buy a book. I've learned, I just ask them if I may sign a copy for you.
Sign a copy.
Yep. And that gets the point across without having to say, will you buy a book?
Yep. So anyways, in conclusion here, me and Fred, we will be at the Garlic Fest in Old Mystic.
That's
in
right.
2 weekends from now, not next weekend, but the following weekend. It's a great venue. There's a lot of neat stuff there.
Good food, too.
Yeah, a lot of great food. And I hope that you'll come down and see us and come by, stop by the booths and say, hey, see what we got.
Sure.
So until next time, thank you very much. This has been Books and Beyond. My guest, Fred Neff. Thank you very much, Fred.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
All right, and
Okay.
take care. We'll see you next time.